Parasites are saving your life. I bet you thought it was the opposite. And really, they're both kind of true because the burden of parasites can also be making your life pretty difficult. How are parasites saving your life, though? Aren't they these big bad pathogens that we just need to get rid of? Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about terrain theory, germ theory, and it's pretty much one of my favorite topics, so it should be fun. Parasites are actually are kind of if one of our evolved appendages of the body that has it's like in the body's infinite wisdom it has called upon other creatures to help it out. So let's start at the beginning though. If you maybe you've heard at this point about the virome. So we are literally descendants from a giant viral soup, just viruses. Viruses is really the beginning of the genetic code creating life. And so this sort of, this has come up in the teachings of the last few years, kind of like, how can we be so fearful of a virus, you know, especially a virus family that has literally been with us forever, for as ever as we can, we are aware of. And what the studies have found is that we are, you know, they say the air itself is just full of viruses. It's full of other bigger things too. It's full of bacteria. It's full of a lot more things nowadays too. But you wouldn't really think that it is so profoundly high percentage of viruses in the air. And that is also true for the ocean water. And that is also true for pretty much every other speck of the planet, including all of us. So the viruses eventually helped us, the viruses help us to write and change codes of our DNA. And so they're at the building blocks of how we as human beings express, how all of life forms come into being, really. And viruses are kind of our little helpers for evolution. They help us change our genes to adapt to the environment, and they share technology and software. It can, you can disseminate information via viruses into a genetic pool, whether it's a colony of bacteria or any other colony of things, living things. And and then our very own bodies are just full of viruses, full of viruses. And, it's just at the very basis of our coding. And right up from that then is bacteria. And bacteria evolved and they are our direct ancestors too. And we are literally built of them. We have more, so now bacteria, you're getting into a little more mass, whereas viruses, really just like the information, which makes us up. But then the bacteria really are like building us, they're what we're formed, they're what we're made of. And just billions of organisms inside of our body, not only as separate cells as bacteria, right, which we have a ton of, but then within our very own cells, every single cell, and many cells, they have more than one, lots of them, are the mitochondria, which are just basically it's obviously a bacteria. It's a bacteria that made it into basically being an organelle inside of our cells. And the mitochondria are, if we didn't have them, we would not be alive because they're the ones actually powering every single cell. that is the energy production. And it's interesting too, because the mitochondria are like a maternal, they're inherited maternally. So that's interesting too. But it's like we have innate bacterial workers, and then we have these like all these other ones that are coexisting with us inside of our bodies, pretty much all of which are keeping us alive, even when it looks like they're also killing us. And that's the real crazy thing that's happening now on planet Earth. And we're going to get to that. Why are they here? Why are they causing us problems? They're already all over, right? But why are we becoming overflowing with these critters that are causing gases that have us in spasming pain, or causing excrement that literally makes us, lose our minds and fly into a rage? Like some of these viruses just in the sinuses just fly into a rage, or develop tics, develop mental disorders that are affecting a lot of our children and a lot of people in general, releasing gases that let us not be able to sleep, or reacting to the full moon, reacting to things around us that we can't even see. Oh, there's so much to get into here, but we're going to come back to the stem cell model, because we all understand that to build a whole human body, you actually start from one cell, and it divides and it replicates and it divides, but they start to differentiate themselves. And from one cell that had all the information sprouts the cells that start to become a dark hair strand, or like an elbow joint synovial fluid cell, and every single other cell in our bodies. And they have really distinct physiology, and they look different and they act different and they specialize. And so we are able to innately, we're able to blossom into other things. We're able to morph. We're able to emerge and change. So there's this incredible concept that has gotten some attention in the more recent times, but it's hard to talk about, I guess, for the people who are really deeply studying this stuff. The scientists, they are not being treated so well, one could say, by the powers that be, because this theory is so, I think, my guess is that this theory really brings a lot out of the shadows and lets you see the man behind the curtain. I don't know. I can't pretend to understand exactly, why they attack certain things, but this concept of pleomorphism is something that has been coming more into my field in teachings the last, 5 years, learning for the first time about the ways that depending on the environment, different things can be elicited from the genetic code, from the genetic expression. So you imagine you go out into the woods and you see the ecosystem, and you see the moss and the little geckos in there, if you're lucky, with some little flies flying, those little, like, little tiny flower flies, like, and there's leaves with little sunlight coming through, and there's like particles in the air that must be pollens and bacterias and things wafting around. And, you can see the deer coming through the woods and so gentle and beautiful. And you see the little creek running and like tinkling and making little sounds. The birds come and feed. Well, now imagine you going to a toxic waste dump or a garbage pile. Now imagine the expression of the earth creatures there. They may look a little bit different than the ones that you could picture in the woods. Maybe there's flies buzzing around, but they're kind of like they're those like kind of intense flies. They're loud, they're buzzing, they're kind of aggressive flies, and you don't have any moss or green underfoot. It's just it's muddy, it's kind of swampy, it's bare earth, you know. The worms are exposed and they're coming up and they're eating weird things. And growing beetles and worms, and there's rats running around. And instead of a deer running through the woods, you have jackals fighting each other, you have dogs kind of scavenging and fighting. And really, like, what was different about these two lands? What was different about why do we have, oh, and we didn't even get into, but there's this like, oh, there's this weird fungus that's like kind of like trying to dissolve some of these petroplastics, some of this trash that's just oozing into the ground. There's fungus colonies taking it over, instead of moss. But the genetic possibility on Earth in all these places, it could create all of those beautiful creatures, or it can create kind of like bloodthirsty monsters, like the mosquitoes in the swamps and these beetles and rats and flies buzzing and like hyenas, Uh, and they do really amazing things, and they take those scraps and they compost it into their bodies. So it's like a compost pile. A compost pile. Those all creatures on Earth have a distinct job area. And we have the, all of them that are taking care of the soils and the communications between the trees and the plants and the mycorrhizae and all of that that's happening in the soil in just a random area. And then you have like how come a compost pile ends up calling in different creatures? It starts to decompose and rot, and then other creatures are called in that you don't normally see in the sort of balanced, regular ecosystem. So this is to give a little bit of kind of a metaphor to paint a picture of how it might actually be happening in our bodies as well. So as we mentioned, we are full of viruses, we are full of bacteria, we are also full of fungus, we are also full of yeast. So we start at the lowest, the smallest, the lowest evolution, and we go up, and we include a wide variety of microorganisms and even some organisms that are all part of the ecosystem inside of us. So you can imagine, and Dr. Campbell McBride, Natasha Campbell McBride, she had a lovely description of this that I got to learn from. And she also, just at the time as in our household, we were talking about this concept of, hey, there must be, there's an ecosystem inside of us, actually. There's an ecosystem, like, we already said maybe we can accept that these viruses, these bacteria, these things are in us, but how are they in us and where are they in us? And it's really incredible because we have an opening to the environment within us, and that is our whole gastrointestinal tract is open to the outside, and it's a tube all the way going through, and then it opens again to the outside. And so actually that entire thing inside of us is it's almost like bringing the outside in, because it's actually walled off from the rest of our body, but it's completely open to the outside. And that whole tube and system is kind of like it's like a earth, it's like a peat, it's like an earthen covering. It's a soil. It's a layer, it's a surface layer basically. And even of that, it has many layers, just like the surface of the earth. And in here and in the GI system, especially, there's like it's a forest in there. It's like there are all the things. There are the mycorrhizal like layers that are holding and form and creating form in there, that other things are living within, and there's that have their pockets of air and their pockets of moisture, and they are exchanging goods and services with the environment, and they are receiving nourishment also as it passes through, and they're also helping nourishment get through into our bodies. So they're there as they're interacting with the outside world, and they're interacting with the inside world. And this community can get upset, and it seems like, oh, well, it's always been a forest. It's always been a beautiful forest. Everybody works together, making the neurochemicals so we can be happy and have dopamine and sleep well, and keep our heart rate going, and keep our lungs pumping, and keep sending those messages up the vagus nerve to the brain, keep everything in communication. It's always been going fine, but for some reason it seems to not be going so fine anymore. And why are we pulling all of these strange creatures out of people? Why are these overgrowths of pathogens, and why are we plagued by candidas and yeasts that are just running our lives, or crippled by viruses that have always been inside of us? Why does that happen? Well, the body has a network of amazing organs, systems, and pathways that it uses to keep itself clean. And it cleans and balances things on a moment by moment, second by second, heartbeat by heartbeat, keeping the blood regulated, keeping the oxygen levels regulated, keeping the flows and the communications going. And every cell is producing its own waste. It's taking in nutrients and it's giving back what it doesn't need. And there's this whole exchange happening. But within the body's own processes and system, it is creating waste materials. And that includes, because it is recycling, it is building whole new cells, it is constantly turning things over. And so there's kind of like these, there's shells, there's skin sloughed, there's different metabolites that the body is trying to pass out, whether it's coming back out through the air, whether it's coming out through the feces, whether it's coming out through the urine, whether it's coming out through the hair, whether it's coming out through the skin. And if the body system gets overwhelmed by additional inputs of toxicity to process, it can do a lot. It can take a lot for sure. We're riding the exciting edge of testing what can the human body live through. What can it survive? What can you put it through? And and it is proving a hardy and amazing machine. And one of its ingenious tactics is, like the earth, who invites her creatures to help her process things. Our body also has the capacity to call in helpers and allow things in that are cleaners, that are scavengers, that are processors. Now, viruses can only handle really tiny things. And we'll get back to that because we have plenty of really tiny, really deadly things happening inside of us. And so we're seeing the viruses come into action and help us out too. But if you can imagine, the cell can process a certain amount, the body cell, but then a certain kind of bacteria, you bring that in, you say, okay, I got some food for you. Here, have a feast. Help me out here. I've got this stuff I need to get rid of. And the bacteria are quite a bit more effective than the body's own cells at doing that. And so the body is like, hey, I'm getting really behind and I need some support. And the bacteria come and they start eating the stuff. Unfortunately, what they poop out is also pretty toxic because they're being fed toxins and then they're transmuting it in their bodies. And so they often excrete things that are also challenging for the body, but they're taking like a lot of things and then they're making it a little bit smaller of a package, but sometimes even a little bit denser of a package. But the bacteria are one level. So the viruses, I said they handle really tiny things, almost on the informational level. And then there's the bacteria. After the bacteria come the funguses. Hey, bacteria, you're not going fast enough. I don't know. We got more food than you can handle. We start inviting the yeast. And what really mind-blowing is that there is studies done that have basically demonstrated that the body's own cells can evolve into these things. And the concept of pleomorphism being that things can change shape, that they can have many shapes. So we actually have evidence for bacteria transforming themselves from one kind into another, and bacteria then into larger organisms like yeasts and fungus. And the body can invite and cultivate and transform its very own self into these things. And so the fungus comes, and the fungus, does an amazing job, especially it can really like soak it in. It starts to soak things up, and then it harbors those toxins. It puts them away inside of its own structure, its own fibrous structure. And so you start to build these kind of layers of this slime or this mold, this fungus that is cleaning up the system, but it is also still harboring and excreting things that are also toxic. But it's taking a huge load off the body. The body could be dead if that fungus wasn't there, because that fungus is processing something the body didn't have enough resources to do. Now, when things get really bad and you start to have those like piles of carcasses that need to be handled, then you start calling in the hyenas, you start calling in the sharks, you start calling in the dogs and the rats, the beetles. So then we have the parasites, And the parasites come in, which are also mostly all already within us. But we open up their expression, we invite them to come, or the infinite wisdom of our body does. And the parasites come and they eat all this really crazy, gnarly, toxic stuff. And they build it into their body. And they become these like harboring creatures, these creatures that just have, they have, vast amounts of waste inside of their skins and their bodies. And they also they eat nutrients and they excrete weird things too. But they're also saving your life. And the body, they wouldn't be there if the body didn't need them to be there. And so why does the body need them to be there? I'll go back to the concept of just what is the body? The body is water. The body is in a large part water. The earth is in a large part water. If you looked in the woods, what are all those things made out of? The leaf and the tree and the fungus and the stream and the creatures around there. They're really high percentage water. And also, if you imagine like a beautiful marsh, with this lushness and the water being filtered through and like the rain filtered through. And then you have a toxic wasteland of, you have like a pig feces swamp that has like chemicals and pharmaceuticals in it. And like there aren't even there's like barely creatures that are brave enough to come around. But the ones that do are those ones that are garbage pile, creepy garbage pile creatures. So what's happening is our body keeps it hidden from us, but we are actually becoming polluted on such a high level that the waters in our bodies they're full of toxins, and that is also that's including our blood and everything. And so we have these areas, these creatures are called in, especially when there's like a low spot, like a lull in the flow of the water, like there's a river, but then if it goes into a bend or something, can become really stagnant. And like right there, especially if there's toxins and chemicals and grease and stuff, it starts to kind of pile up on the edges, and it can become like its own stinking swamp pool right there. And those places of low current are often the first areas of our body to show symptoms and weak points and pain and discomfort. And why is that? It's because there are a plethora of creatures that there's an acidic, stagnant environment full of toxins and creatures trying to eat it and decompose it. And all of those toxins and acidity of that swamp is eating away at our own body flesh and organisms. And then these creatures are trying to clean all that up and trying to just like finish the compost, and unfortunately that's happening in our joints. These are some of the places of low tide, of low circulation. They're tight spaces and there's less flow, and things start to pool and pile up. This is why people end up with gout in their feet and their toes, different parts of the body that things start to accumulate in different corners. But it's not just the joints and it's not just the edges of the body, but also places that are normally used for cleaning, such as the liver, such as the colon. As we talked about this all the toxins eventually get put into the GI system to be taken out with the feces. And so we end up with a high toxic sludge going through there. And so there's a lot of creatures come to help digest the situation. So we start having these sort of toxic heaps in the liver, we start having toxic heaps in the gut, start having toxic heaps in the lungs, in the lymph. But at a certain point and at a certain threshold, it's kind of like stash it wherever you can. And it starts to be pretty ubiquitously toxins in every cell of most systems of the body. And certain fat soluble toxins are going to be stored in fat soluble organs, including the brain, and certain other toxins that have affinities to other natural elements, say, the thyroid gland and other glands that have a high affinity for iodine. When toxic halogens come in, such as chlorine and fluoride, and bromide, then they, and also radiated forms of these things, radioactive forms, they are going to gravitate to those specific places that have an affinity. Also, the reproductive systems has certain affinities. And now not only do we have like understandable, reasonable toxins like metals and plastics and things, but we have estrogens, and we have hormonal toxicants. We have hormones floating around in this cologne stuff, and we have hormones in the plastic and in the food, and literally hormones in the food that, was fed hormones for food, synthetic hormones. And we have, so we have things that they interact with our body in different ways, and they also go and have affinities to different places, and then they have different effects. And so this is why it, can look like a lot of different diseases too, or a lot of people express it so differently. And that's a way that makes it easy to distract us from seeing what are all of these diseases. It looks so, it looks different, and it has a different name, and this one's genetic, and my friend Billy has this one. And um, most of all of that are naming different ways it looks when different organs start to go into failure, or different systems start to go into failure, or different parts of the body are being so degraded by the composters that that area is failing for some reason. So they're really all pointing to the same thing, and that is the breakdown of the body systems. And the way I see it really clearly is that it's through poisoning, and that all of these pathogens and developed diseases that we are have blossoming epidemics of, pandemics really, of all of them, autoimmune disease, fatigue syndromes, neurological syndromes, post-infection syndromes, diabetes, cancers. To me it's really all the same, and it it's a natural consequence. Each of those things are a natural consequence of basically poisoning to the point of starting to break down the functioning, and even getting to the point of breaking down the control centers. Some of these glands and parts of the brain and parts of the nervous system are in charge of a lot. And so it can start to not only affect just by physically being there, but then also starting to make haywire a little bit the computer systems of the body. So yes, the parasites are saving your life, and they are also potentially killing you because, it's being taken back to the earth. That's what composting is. Composting is supposed to happen when something is dead, basically. But if it's happening while you're still alive, then you've got some problems. You've got some problem areas to clean up. And there are awesome ways to start turning the tide on this inner toxicity, start turning the tide on this ecosystem, start cultivating a environment that is inviting to the bacteria that don't have such big of fangs and claws. You can start soothing them back into their other shapes, their helpful shapes, their life supporting forms, if you clean up the environment so that those hyenas are not necessary anymore. And thank you for going on this journey with me. If there's something about this particular topic that you want to hear more about, you can put it in a comment. And if you want to find out how to start bringing down this toxic load and emptying out the buckets that all of these creatures are helping to bail, if you want to learn how to start encouraging a different environment, check out this video and this playlist. Siena Songbird.